Good morning. You're listening to Retake Our Democracy, a 30-minute weekly radio show that airs at 8:30 a.m. each Saturday morning on KSFR 101.1 FM, your Santa Fe public radio station. Don't live near Santa Fe? You can still listen to Retake Our Democracy by going to ksfr.org, and it streams at 8:30 a.m. You can listen to it in Las Cruces, you can listen to it in Albuquerque and Taos, in Ruidoso, in Spain, anywhere in the world where you can get an internet connection, you can listen to Retake on the radio. Today, I'll be speaking with Senator Jerry Ortiz Pino and Tom Solomon, and we'll be discussing the largely untapped potential of geothermal development in New Mexico. We'll get to Tom and Jerry in just a second. Oh my, Tom and Jerry, that brings back flashbacks of Saturday morning cartoons. We'll get back to our guests in just a second after a couple of quick announcements. Last week, we spoke with two very engaged Albuquerque activists, Ray Ellen Smith and Tiffany Stevens, both of whom play leadership roles in Albuquerque Indivisible and the Democratic Party. We discussed their views on why and how they advocate in those organizations. And with every legislative district up for re-election, we also discussed their views on Dems in Albuquerque who may have earned a primary challenge, and spoke about a developing Democratic challenge of Senator Greg Schmeeds in District 19. We covered a lot of ground. It's an interesting radio show. And the week prior, I interviewed Land Commissioner Stephanie Garcia Richard. We discussed her role as Land Commissioner, the legislatures authorizing the creation of a renewable energy office within the Land Commission, and what more may be possible with this office in place. We also discussed the extraordinary amount of renewable energy being developed on state land under her watch, and other ways the Land Commission can constrain or contain extraction on state land and or promote renewable energy development. And as this interview goes forward today, we may have a reference to the Land Commission again. I want to remind you that if you're listening to this show while driving around town and you miss any of today's show, you can watch the full YouTube recording of this show and any prior radio show by going to retakeourdemocracy.org, clicking on the Retake on the Radio button on the lower right-hand side of the homepage, and all of the radio shows will be listed in chronological order. So you can stream Retake interviews all day. As we announced in our last blog, Retake is taking a 6-month hiatus, so Roxanne and I have time and energy to address some long overlooked personal aspirations and to restore balance in our lives. The Retake work is a full-time, unpaid job, something that is simply not sustainable over the long haul. We've been doing this work since the fall of 2015, and we aren't getting any younger. So it is time to figure out how to make Retake a permanent advocacy organization. And while our application for Rethink Our Democracy's 501c3 nonprofit status has been approved by the IRS, while flying the Retake plane, we've had inadequate time, energy, and focus to construct the Rethink plane. We want to use the hiatus to explore what a rejuvenated Rethink could look like, with 1 or 2 staff doing what Roxanne and I do now, and with us taking a step back. We feel the platform we've developed warrants being sustained. So stay tuned. During this hiatus, we'll use this radio show to update you on our progress and, as possible, offer timely alerts on emerging political and policy news. Before we get started, I also want to acknowledge that we're conducting this show on stolen Tewa land, and want to thank our Tewa neighbors for being such good stewards of the land. We could learn much from their custodial caring for the land, water, and air. And boy, we better learn it soon. Okay, let's get started. Welcome, Senator and Tom.
Thank you, Paul.
I always like to let our guests. Okay, I always like to let our guests introduce themselves. So how about you take a couple of minutes each to tell us who you are and why you are eager to see New Mexico develop thermal projects. Let's start with the Senator.
Well, Paul, I'm a retired social worker who got into politics after spending 40 years in New Mexico in a whole bunch of different communities and settings. And in the Senate, where I've served since 2005, I've been focused mainly on behavioral health and physical health issues. I chair the Health and Human Services Committee during the interim. And this past year, I suddenly got interested in geothermal because of a TED talk that somebody emailed me, and I was just thoroughly intrigued. Contacted Tom Solomon, who I thought if anybody knows about geothermal, it would be Tom. And turns out he didn't know at the time a whole lot, but he's an inveterate researcher and has spent the last year and a half really digging out the possibilities for geothermal in New Mexico, which are vast. And so that's where I am. I'm still in the Senate. I have another year to go before my term ends. And I'd like to see us get this geothermal bill launched.
Okay, how about you, Tom?
Thanks, Paul. So I am a retired electrical engineer, spent a career in the semiconductor manufacturing industry with Intel and then retired in 2011. I've been the co-coordinator of environmental group called 350 New Mexico since early 2013, so about 10 years now. You know, I am in this work because I'm a father of three, and I care about their future along with the future of all of the rest of us, as climate change is an existential threat. And when the senator contacted me and asked me to facilitate the group, I jumped at the chance. I'd love to work with Senator Ortiz Pino, but also really been interested in exploring the possibility of geothermal energy development as kind of the third leg of the renewable energy stool that can allow us to convert to 100% renewable energy. And we'll talk a lot more about that, I think, as we go forward.
Okay. So Tom, this one's for you. I think that most of our listeners know what geothermal is, but just for those who may not, can you give us a 30,000 feet overview of what geothermal is and why it would be good for New Mexico?
Right. I'll give you a 10,000 foot under the earth view of what geothermal is.
All right.
So
That's even better.
geo is earth and thermal is heat. So it's heat from the earth. And of course, the core of the earth is extraordinarily hot, left over from the planet's formation. And at some points it is close to the temperature of the surface of the sun. Obviously, it gets cooler as you get towards the surface, but deep underground, it is really, really hot. And you can see that in the volcanoes that come up and in, hot water that comes from the underneath the earth, like at Yellowstone and the Old Faithful geyser. And those are hot water energy resources that can be tapped to provide a number of good benefits for all of us living on the surface. You can heat homes with hot water, and that's done in places like Reykjavik, Iceland, which heats about 95% of their homes with geothermal hot water that comes from the earth. You can also use it to create electricity because an electrical power plant basically just uses heat to turn water into steam, which drives a steam turbine, which drives and creates electricity. You don't have to burn coal or natural gas to create that heat. You can use the natural heat from the underneath our feet from the earth. And so that is the exciting possibility of geothermal energy, is to provide clean electricity in addition to solar and wind, as we said, the third leg of the 100% renewable energy stool.
So I recall you did some kind of an online presentation on geothermal, and in it you described it as basically using the same technology, drilling technology, as fracking. And so, employees in the gas and oil industry would have a relatively easy transition over to geothermal. Do I have that about right?
Yes, you do. It is literally the exact same equipment and the exact same workers that would drill for heat, for geothermal heat, that use those drilling rigs to drill for natural gas or for oil. And as an example of that, there was a test well drilled late last year near the boot heel of New Mexico by one of the companies we worked with called Ever, EAVOR, and they literally borrowed an oil drilling rig from Texas, brought it over, and used those same expert oil drillers to drill for the heat that they were looking for near the existing geothermal plant in that area that is called Lightning Dock. So yes, the skills and the equipment are nearly directly transferable, probably with just a tiny amount of retraining, but drilling is drilling.
Okay, so that's very promising. Another promising thing I remember from your presentation is I believe you said that geothermal projects could be done virtually anywhere in New Mexico. What are the geological requirements necessary for geothermal development?
So, of course, the earth is hot, depending upon where you want to drill, you can always find hot rock under your feet. The advantage of New Mexico is that there is a geological zone called the Rio Grande Rift, which runs along where the Rio Grande River flows, which is where the crust is thinner, meaning the hot mantle, the magma from underneath the earth is closer to the surface, which means that it's cheaper to drill into that to find that hot rock because you don't have to drill as deep. And it costs, roughly on the order of $1 million per 1,000 feet to drill a well. So if you can, drill it 18,000 feet instead of 25,000 feet or more, then it's more economical. And so drilling in the Rio Grande Rift, which goes from, say, Taos in northern New Mexico, kind of diagonally down to Deming and Lordsburg, that's roughly where the best geothermal resources are located, is the best place to develop geothermal energy in the state. Other places are possible, but they would not be quite as economical.
So last technical question, and then we're going to turn to the senator for the political end of this stuff. What scale of investment would be needed to produce enough geothermal energy for New Mexico to meet 100% of its energy needs when combined with solar and wind? In other words, to be that third leg of the tripod.
Sure. So the clean energy transition, will play out, and it has to play out over the next couple of decades. And the estimates that I think we latched on to say that geothermal could be up to 10% of that total renewable energy mix at 100% renewable energy, the rest of it being solar and wind with some battery storage. So at 10% of the state's energy requirement, which currently is about 9,000 megawatts at the summertime peak when the maximum electric load occurs. You're looking at 9,000 megawatts there. When we convert to 100% renewable energy and stop using fossil fuels, then all of our current uses of fossil fuels for heating our homes and driving our cars and airplanes and all of that stuff, we will have to build about triple the amount of electricity on the grid in order to complete that 100% transition. So then you're talking about 30,000 megawatts of electricity. So 10% of that total would be about 3,000 megawatts or 3 gigawatts. That's the amount of geothermal that you'd want to build. We will have to build it regardless of whether it's geothermal or, God forbid, new coal plants or new gas-fired power plants. Geothermal today is, according to Lazard, about competitive in terms of capital costs with a new coal plant. It's about half the price of a new nuclear plant because it's significantly less complicated. But in terms of raw numbers, we're probably looking in the $10 to $15 billion of investment for that 10% If it were geothermal, it would be double that if we had to build it with nuclear. So those are the kinds of numbers that we're looking at. But the numbers are probably not that critical because you always finance with Wall Street money any new energy infrastructure that you're going to build, and then you pay for it with the money that you charge utility customers. That's how you pay back that loan, and it is some of the cheapest electricity that you're going to be able to build, along with solar and wind. So it pays for itself over time, and that's how you
Well,
find
it
it.
sounds very promising then, Tom. So now it's going to be interesting to hear from our senator as to the political challenges. You introduced SB 8 in the 2023 session, Senator, and that would have created a geothermal resources center for excellence at the New Mexico Institute for Mining and Technology, and would have created two new funds, the Geothermal Projects Development Fund and the Geothermal Projects Revolving Loan Fund, possibly the kinds of funds we're talking about needing to get this geothermal off the ground. The bill would have tasked the Energy Conservation and Management Division of, or ECMD, with the administration of these funds and empowered the division to ensure all applicable state economic development incentive programs are used for grants and loans from these funds to foster the growth of geothermal resources. The bill also would have added a requirement that ECMD apply for federal grants related to geothermal resources. There was so much to like about this bill that it sailed through both chambers and even secured a unanimous vote of approval in the Senate, only to be vetoed by the governor. Have you received any information about why she vetoed this bill?
No, we haven't. We were very surprised by the governor's action, had been led to believe by her staff that in fact she supported the idea. We'd met with some of her staff, had asked to meet with the governor, wasn't able to schedule that with us, but had no inkling that there was any problem with the bill until her veto. I would point out that although she vetoed the overall bill, the appropriation for the Center of Excellence for Geothermal Research at New Mexico Tech did get included in the budget. She didn't veto that language out. So there is now a $400,000, we believe it's a recurring appropriation to New Mexico Tech to foster further development of geothermal research in the state. And Dr. Sherry Kelly, who's been part of our work group on this issue, in conjunction with a couple of faculty from New Mexico State, Dr. Patricia Sullivan and Dr. Olga Larova, they're from New Mexico State, but they team up nicely with Dr. Kelly. So we're going to be able to see further expansion of some of the research work into geothermal, setting the stage for what we hope will happen this next session. The governor's staff did say that although she vetoed it because she had some problems, which never did get specified, she was willing to meet with us and to consider reintroducing it. She'll put it on her call for the 2024 30-day session. It would take a call from a message from the governor to get it included in our agenda. And hopefully we'll be able to get the other pieces that were left out done then, which is expanded capacity at Energy Minerals and Natural Resources. And then the two funds that we were hoping to get set up. One would be a loan fund for private businesses who want to get drilling started or develop a new technique or something, a new piece of equipment. They could borrow money and then repay it. The other one would be a outright grant fund available to state agencies and universities to use as matching or seed money for projects that are available through the federal government. There's a lot of federal money available for geothermal development, and we were hoping to be able to use our fund to get that off the ground.
So would there be any interest on the part of you or the state in utilizing revenue that is in one form of reserve or another in the state reserve to provide the funds to create the infrastructure rather than partnering with the private sector?
Well, I mean, the problem there is we just don't have a mechanism for state government to go out and do its own development. The way we've set things up, it almost requires us to, we could partner with private companies so that we would be, and some of the investments made by the State Investment Council are set up that way, so that if the technological innovation really has payoff, the state shares in that. New Mexico Tech itself, for example, has a steady revenue stream from some invention that one of the faculty members came up with some years ago that continues to pay a bonus every year to them. And we could do this same thing with anything that we help finance. But the actual drilling and the actual creation, I think the way we've set this up would still require somebody to put the front money for the construction of the facility that would convert the heat from the earth into electricity and then spin it around through the distribution lines.
So it sounds as if you're determined to submit legislation in 2024. Are there sources of opposition to geothermal? For example, does the gas and oil industry feel threatened by geothermal?
Yeah, we've hypothesized that maybe people who were eager for the hydrogen hub might be the ones who persuaded the governor to go slow on geothermal while the hydrogen hub gets going. Nobody ever said anything about that. We're simply clutching at straws, trying to figure out what in the world could have led the governor to do this veto. There's no reason we shouldn't be developing geothermal. It's not a threat to the oil and gas industry, because all it would do would be to help us meet goals that we've already established for freeing ourselves from fossil fuel. In fact, by using some of the same workers and some of the same technology that they use to drill for oil, we could drill for heat from the earth and have no emissions problems, have no global warming effect, and be able to actually get it off the ground. So we heard and saw no. There were 3 negative votes in the House, and I have not tracked down who those 3 negative votes were, but that was out of 70 members. And so it was minuscule opposition. Nothing was voiced on the floor. So I'm just at a loss to know why. In fact, we had strong bipartisan support, with some of our great support coming from Republicans as well as Democrats. We had co-sponsors in both houses from both parties. So I think this is a win-win for everybody. I'm just really eager to find out why the governor took the action she did, and then figure out what we need to overcome that opposition.
So
Yeah.
with obviously,
Well, if I could chime in and add
Sure.
to the senator's answer by saying that, in fact, a good portion of the early investment in some of these advanced geothermal companies that we're working with, like Fervo and Ever, is actually coming from the oil industry itself. Chevron, British Petroleum, Devon Energy, and almost every single oil major has an active geothermal development program of their own that they have come up with really over the last 3 years, developed internally from their own employees who really want to see some aspect of their company working on a clean energy project that is not just greenwashing. So this is money coming from within the oil industry, and they want to develop it. And that manifested itself in the bipartisan support that the senator just mentioned. So, yeah,
okay.
no opposition from
And
the
it
oil
does
industry.
seem like you've got strong allies in the legislature on this. But would it help if we, like, between now and the next session, we were able to identify a specific pilot project site, say in a rural New Mexico community that might have a conservative, even a conservative Democrat representatives there who might be lukewarm support now, but would become strong advocates? I'm thinking really McKinley County right now. Would that add political heft to getting this done?
Well, it could. There is, we should mention, there is an existing geothermal electricity generating plant down in the Boot Hill. It's called Lightning Dock, and it's had some problems. It uses hot water from the earth rather than the more advanced models that we've been talking about, which would use just the heat and have no need to dispose of the hot water after it's been generated. But that lightning dock is in an area represented by conservative Republicans and conservative Democrats. And so I think they're familiar with it, and they understand the appeal. So I think that you know, if that were the site, that would be great. McKinley is a little far from the rift, but as we've said, any location in the state has the potential for being if you're willing to drill deep enough, the potential for generating electricity from geothermal.
Okay.
And the geothermal test well that I mentioned earlier that was drilled near Lightning Dock went down 18,000 feet, which is quite deep, and they reached hot rock temperatures of 250 degrees Celsius, which is over 480 degrees Fahrenheit. So very, very hot rock. They met their technology goals for that demonstration test well project to the extent that they actually got some funding from some of their early investors, another $20 million. Sadly, the project that they're going to go forward with next is in Nevada. So, you know, you could postulate that if we had such a bill and some of the incentives that we were going after, that New Mexico could compete for that project funding so that some of those demonstration and next phase projects would show up in New Mexico.
We'll get back to the senator in just a minute. I have to close the show, and so the last bit of our conversation will be off on the retake on the radio on YouTube. But I need to remind our listeners that you're listening to KSFR, and KSFR is more important than ever in these times of misinformation in the mainstream and social media and in most political rhetoric, no matter what party. In the face of that information, there's KSFR offering timely news and alerts and a wide range of programming to keep you informed and sane in these ever so challenging times. In an era replete with misinformation at KSFR, you get the straight scoop, fact-based news from Amy Goodman on Democracy Now! You get The View from Europe with the BBC and KSFR's own state and local news. Plus, they offer an array of great music curated by disc jockeys with personality who produce hour-long shows with great music. For me, though, the most important contribution from KSFR are the informative discussions on timely issues, from Economic Update with renowned Marxist Richard Wolff, Retake Our Democracy, Native America Calling, and a host of other moderated discussions. Where else can you get an hour of socialist radio every Saturday morning from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m.? Only KSFR. So we just had a pledge week at KSFR. I'd like to ask our listeners to go to ksfr.org, click on the donate button, and offer them 20, 30, 50 bucks and view it as your ticket for admission to a great array of programming. We'll continue our discussion with Senator Ortiz, Pino, and Tom Solomon on our radio show. Tom, can you just, before we sign off, give information about where they can get more information about geothermal?
Yes, indeed. So the full presentation that the senator and others, including me, have presented to interim committees and the legislature is available on the 350 New Mexico website. So if you go to 350newmexico.org and look at the About tab, you can find a section on presentations, and the recording and the slide deck is there, and you can see that. That's probably one of the best places, and within that there are links to other good geothermal resources.
Okay, well, we'll be back with the senator and Mr. Solomon in just a moment. We've got to pause for seconds. Okay, we're back. Senator, you had your hand up, so I know you were eager to say something in response to what Tom was saying.
Yes, I was, Paul. The incentives that that I neglected to mention included some tax credits. And those were separated from our full bill and included in the tax package. Unfortunately, they too were vetoed by the governor. But those don't sting as much as the other, because it was not likely that we would have been awarding any tax credits this year, because they were tied to production of electricity from the geothermal. We do need those in the future, I believe, as an incentive to encourage the development in New Mexico. The fact that the people that drilled the well at Animas then went to Nevada is kind of discouraging, because we really hope to be one of the pioneers in this field and at the forefront of the development of this very exciting energy resource.
Okay, so Tom, is there any research as to how many jobs would be created by this scale of geothermal development, and how many long-term jobs, not just in the development of the infrastructure, but sustained jobs? And what about state and local revenues?
I can give you the jobs answer. There's an organization called the Geothermal Energy Association that has published some estimates of employment at a geothermal electric plant. And it tends to be a bit more workers required than a gas-fired power plant, just because the added complexity of managing the geothermal resource requires some additional operations and service. So they talk about 36 workers, full-time workers during operations and maintenance for a 50 megawatt plant. And if you do the math and you say, okay, if you need 3 gigawatts, 3.2 gigawatts, then you're talking about 64 potential 50 megawatt plants. You do that math, you're looking at about 2,300 jobs in operations and service. This would be long-term employment. But during construction, you would have an enormously larger number of jobs during design and construction, on the order of 760 jobs per plant. So you're looking at 49,000 jobs over, stretched maybe over 15, 20 years of the construction build out of this 10% geothermal contribution to the 100% mix. So lots and lots of jobs potential in the state. I don't know what that would turn into in terms of state revenues, but certainly you get there is I think sales tax applied to every bit of electricity that you buy, so that would accrue to the state, and of course all of those workers would pay income taxes as well.
Okay, well, it sounds like it's a very promising project, and I hope we can get it moving forward. Are there any technical issues that need to be resolved that might delay development of a pilot site? Or is the research in?
So there is an existing geothermal energy electricity infrastructure that is built out. The United States actually generates more geothermal electricity than any other country in the world, mostly in California and Nevada. What we're looking at is what's called enhanced or advanced geothermal, which is drilling to just find hot rock, and then you provide your own fluid from the surface to circulate through that hot rock, gather the heat, bring it up to the surface, and run a power plant. For those, there are some technical issues that have to be resolved. The industry for that advanced geothermal kinds of project is in the late R&D, early pilot phase, I would say. And the two technical issues that they're working with is, how do you have a drill bit technology that survives the really high temperature rock that you're drilling into? Because, oil rigs they're not looking for hot rock, they're looking for oil. So they don't deal with those temperatures. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is effectively and economically drilling through the very, very or much hotter or harder rocks that you encounter at that depth. Think granite rather than softer sedimentary rocks. So, drilling bits that survive high temperature and can effectively drill through harder rocks. And they are solving those technological problems right now. And that was the purpose of one of the purposes of that test project that Ever did in the Bootheel is to demonstrate some of their early phase technology. We are probably looking at, projects at scale being built out in the 5 to 10 to 15-year horizon from now, as they work through the early phase pilot projects, which we are entering into right now over the next few years, and then can build them at scale.
Okay, so this question is for either of you, and it sort of comes right out of what Tom was talking about. I interviewed the land commissioner 2 weeks ago, and she's very excited about the prospect of using state land for geothermal development. Would involving her now help facilitate support for enabling legislation?
Yeah, she testified in support of the geothermal, and her staff has been involved. Tom's met with her staff a couple of times. Her involvement would be very crucial because one of the barriers that the companies identified for us was permitting. And if they're drilling on federal land, it goes through a 2-year, very red tape-ish process of getting permission to drill on the federal land, even for geothermal, where there's no emissions, no produced water to deal with, any of that. She said that she could get the permits for drilling on state land, of which there is considerable amount in New Mexico, in just the areas where we need it. She could get that done in a much more expeditious fashion. So we think that that's really very promising. And of course, then that becomes a revenue source for the land grant permanent fund if we're drilling on state land. And so this has great potential. And we haven't really talked about some of the other geothermal possibilities as well. But Tom at one point was showing a slide that showed a kind of a cascading use of hot fluid that came up from these wells, in which, yeah, they drove a turbine, but then as they cooled, they could be used for heating greenhouses and then for drying sheds for drying chili or drying nuts or whatever else you need to dry, and then ultimately become hot springs where people could swim and take the waters. It was an intriguing idea of how the true geothermal potential is multifaceted in this state. Oh, and then just the other piece that Senator Soules had a bill on this year would have given tax credits for people who use land, what do they call it?
Ground source
heat pumps to heat their buildings. We have some public buildings that are heated that way now. We'd like to see that expanded. But for people who want to in their own home, because of the constant steady temperature below ground, it serves as a way of helping to heat the home in the winter and to cool it in the summer.
Right. Yeah, Senator Soules, I'm sure, is going to be one of your big allies.
Mm-hmm.
Tom, if the legislation was passed in 2024 with funds to launch and study a pilot site, how long would it take to launch, and how long would it take to be using geothermal online?
So as we said, the industry for this advanced geothermal technology we're looking at is in the kind of late R&D, early pilot phase. I think to build a geothermal pilot plant is on the order of a couple of years to get it done, and so we would be looking at possibly bringing some of that stuff on in the late 2020s. In a reasonable, maybe best case scenario, certainly the early 2030s. And the way the renewable energy transition plays out is you really want to deploy massive amounts of solar and wind and battery for the early phase, and then the last 10%, last 15 to 10% of the energy transition, which is a little bit harder to solve, you'd really like some dispatchable baseload 24/7 power source to replace, the coal-fired power plants, the nuclear power plants that you'll be phasing out at that time. And that is the niche that geothermal really serves really well. So we're looking at the real need for this in 10 years out, but you could see them starting to be deployed in this decade.
So this is for either of you. For the sake of argument, let's say we secure the funding and launch a geothermal project in a New Mexico county. What kind of measures would the New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology want to study? In other words, what would we want to learn from a pilot project?
Well, one thing for sure would be just how effective it is to use existing technology, or whether there's some need to expand the technological capacity of the companies in order to make it really work well. But one of the things that happened in Las Cruces a few years back, they were heating large part of the campus, including the big basketball arena and their dormitories and everything, with geothermal fluid. But after about 15 years of operation, they had to stop because there were some problems with corrosion in the piping and the system. And so what you'd want to make sure you do is, as these new technologies come online, make sure that any unforeseen issues that arise are dealt with right away. So you want the New Mexico Tech Center of Excellence to be working alongside these companies, making sure that all the information we can garner from those experiences is used in the next set of experiences, so that we have a constant improvement loop going on.
So I take it then that the New Mexico Institute for Mining and Technology would be a key partner in evaluating and setting the stage for replicating other projects throughout the state.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, and in fact, it's one of the projects that they intend to pursue with some of this early phase money that did survive this legislative session, is to plant the seeds and the very beginnings of a consortium of geothermal entities coordinating academia, government resources, private industry, and Sandia Labs, for example, that has a geothermal development office in New Mexico. Bring all those groups together and work together to develop this resource and figure out what problems need to be solved and do that cooperatively.
Well, it sounds as if we've got most of our ducks lined up. What do advocates from Retake, Indivisible, and 350 New Mexico need to do to move those ducks towards the finish line? Senator?
Well, I would think that strong support from them would be invaluable in getting the bill through this next session. Contacting the governor's office, making sure she understands this is something with great grassroots appeal. It's got to be effective. And then I would think the other thing that might be done is just talking to some of the utility companies that are the end clients for the electricity generated, and trying to interest them in supporting geothermal development, switching from their fascination with natural gas and switching it over to geothermal, which in the long run will have much more beneficial effect for New Mexico. Those are two things that come to my mind. Tom probably has some others.
I would add a third, which is that during the course of the summer, we do intend to visit one or more of the interim committees of the state legislature, specifically, for example, legislative finance, to advocate for adding in the funding that didn't survive this last session, the $25 million in grant funds and loan funds that the senator alluded to. And so we would really like that to get included into next year's proposed budget, so then it's much easier for it to get included in the final budget. And so if anybody wants to show up and make public comments in favor of that funding when the interim committees meet, that would certainly help us as well. We don't currently know what the timing is for those meetings, because the LFC has not yet met to establish their agendas, but we expect that we expect we'll know that by early June, and we'll get the word out to you, Paul, when we know.
Okay, well, one last question for the senator, and this is tangentially related to geothermal. In the last session, very little climate legislation got to the governor, and most of what did pass got vetoed. Is the gas and oil industry so politically powerful that any effort to pass meaningful climate legislation is doomed? If so, what can advocates do to achieve policies and regulations without legislative or governor actions?
Yeah, I think it is true that we didn't send her a lot, and then what did go up did get vetoed. Part of the issue is, I think, not so much that oil and gas is any more powerful than they've ever been. They've always had a great deal of influence because they represent the only industry that people know in some parts of the state. When you talk about the economy of New Mexico, 1/3 of our state revenue is coming from oil and gas right now. So this, I think, is geothermal is a viable alternative that will produce jobs, tax revenue, and be a way of dealing with climate crisis that everybody can get behind. So I was startled by the governor's decision. I don't think she was, I don't know why she did it. Certainly, we already have goals in mind that will require us to wean ourselves from dependence on oil and gas. And so if they were behind her decision, it was just a brief delay. It won't succeed in stopping what we have to get done. I didn't see any real opposition to environmental legislation. I think what we are hoping is that some of the things that did get through things like the community solar in the last few years, community solar, the Energy Transition Act, the clean fuel standards, things like that will begin having an effect, but that we have to keep the momentum going. And coming up with ideas that will keep that momentum going is the trick. I think geothermal is one of the things that has that potential.
Okay. Well, I want to thank both of you. I don't want to take any more of your time. This has been a great interview, and we'll have it posted up on our Retake on the Radio station later today, actually, in advance of it airing on Saturday, because I have to download it to get it to the radio station. And thank you very much. I'll be back in touch with you because while Retake is taking a step back, we have to find a way to support this. And we're not going to be doing action alerts about interim hearings, so we need to figure out a way to get the word out to people about that. Because I agree with you, Tom. That's where the action is. That's where you can get into the budget and build even stronger support legislatively. So enjoy the beautiful weather and the weekend. And thank you for both for being with me today.
Thanks, Paul.
Okay. Bye-bye.